Sup, y'all?
What up?
So, if you don't know who I am, I'm Julian. Okay, so far we've been going through our series called Fake News. Now, this series would not exist without me. Because I came up with the idea, and I came to Mitch, because Mitch didn't know what to preach. And I usually say them on a daily basis. So, no, I'm just joking. I'm so
At his
joking.
funeral, they're going to say, Julius, he was so humble.
I knew I'd do.
I love it about
So, fake news
This is what happens when I give him the phone.
Oh, I'm just saying. No, I'm not gonna do that on. No. But the thing is that we've been going through this series, fake news, because it's so important that we recognize the fake truths that are in the church today. There's a lot of fake truths. There's a lot of things that people claim about God that isn't true. That is in the church today. And so, this is the last night of it. This is night 4 of our series. And I'm so excited to get to do it solo, like Jason Derulo. And Jason Derulo. And so our main voice, but I knew a whole song. Our main verse, the verse that this is based off of, is Galatians 1:6. It says, I am astonished that you are so quickly deserting him who called you in the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel. And that goes all the way down to verse 10, and it's basically Paul reiterating that there's a lot of different gospels that were going on at the time, and he doesn't want them to desert their first love being Christ. Yeah. And so the goal for our series is we are going to challenge the way that we perceive, believe, and profess God. And hopefully we've been doing that. I know I've definitely learned a lot, and I love preparing, and I love digging in and seeing familiar stories in a way that challenges today's norms in the church. So our questions have been, how do we see God? That's my personal favorite, because you got to start somewhere, and I think we started pretty well. How do we see God in ourselves? How has God been depicted? And today, drum roll, well, it's up there. How do we recognize God? Which is known as Revelation. Yes, I did. Revelation. I love that picture. And I literally typed in Revelation, and Jesus on toast was the #1 picture that appeared. And so I had to do it.
That's so great.
And so, Revelation is a very sticky topic. It's a book in the Bible. It's the last one. And ironically, this is the last night. That wasn't planned. And it's a very sticky topic because the word revelation, I kept thinking of a different word to use other than revelation because it has a lot of connotations to it. Because a lot of people claim revelation from God, and they end up being a cult that moves everyone to South Africa and Jonestown and gives them poison Kool-Aid, all because of a revelation. And so the proper revelation of God is what we're going to be talking about today. And the text we're going to be using is Luke 24:13-35. Now, y'all, you know my relationship with long stories in the Bible that are relevant, but they're long. And, you know,
a movie?
Yes, we're gonna watch a video, because read the story. Please, read it. I trust you, it's interesting. But I got 35 minutes, y'all. So we're not gonna be doing all that today. So there's a clip. This is actually a very, very famous story. It's a very, very famous part of Easter, where Easter isn't a day, Easter is a season in the church. And I guess Easter is a lifestyle too. And so this story is the Emmaus Road story. If you guys heard that in Sunday school or growing up, this is one of my favorite stories. And so we're going to watch it, and then we're going to zero in on my revelations. So.
Slow down. Slow down. We're far enough from Jerusalem. We're just 2 pilgrims on the road. If anyone asks, we were in Jerusalem for Passover. We heard of this Jesus. We saw him preaching in the temple, but we never saw him. Oh, Galileans. Maybe we heard him preach. We heard him from Galilee. Who's that you're talking about? Jesus of Nazareth.
What about him? He was some sort of teacher. Some pilgrims thought he was the leader come to free us.
So they said to us.
He was condemned and handed over to the Romans.
So? He was crucified. And now they said he's come back to life.
You don't believe the scriptures? What he says.
Isaiah wrote that the Son of God will come to earth. He'll know human death at the hands of men. Surely Jesus told you these things would happen.
I've heard such things.
You're slow to believe.
My brother's house is this way. Why don't you stop with us for some food? Come. Come and eat with us.
What are you doing?
This is the bread of life. This is my body, given up for you. This is my blood, poured out for the healing of others.
I tell you, he is risen. He appeared to us. He broke bread with us.
Okay, so I love that scene just because of what it does. I don't like the Jesus though. Jesus looks weird.
Jesus is supposed to
honest-
be unrecognizable.
No, I like the first Jesus, like the Jesus in disguise, but the second Jesus, they could have just stuck with the first guy. I like the first guy. The first guy reminds me of the Ankine guy, the Ankine paintings of Jesus. So I don't know her name, she's foreign. So my question for you today is, have you ever been caught off guard? Have you ever been caught off guard? Now, I'm guilty. I like to scare my little brother. I love scaring my little brother. It is a pastime of mine. Now, before you guys start saying, Julius, you shouldn't do that, you love him, that's debatable. I think that I'm doing a service that I should be paid for. And the reason why I think that I'm doing a service that I should be paid for is because my brother is in middle school stage, which means that it's all about, let's be cool, let's do anything, let's be cool. And this boy, he has more ego than Kanye. It's ridiculous. Like, when I kid you not, last summer, this boy went outside in an orange shirt and red shorts, and this summer he's wearing Yeezys and all this other stuff, and it gotta be name brand, and it gotta be endorsed by somebody. Like, really? And my brother is something else. He literally told my mom one day, my mom was like, why is it that you can't just be yourself? Like, because he was at the dinner table as usual, asking for stuff, and my mom was like, why can't you just be yourself? And he turned to my mom. This is not a testimony as to where millennials are right now. He turned to my mother, and he said, Mom, I'm building a personal brand. What? Are you kidding me? You are in 5th grade. You don't have a personal brand. Now look, everybody does have a personal brand. Everyone has an aesthetic. You know, you can tell from my Instagram. Shameless shout out, JXS God. But you are in 5th grade. You don't need a personal brand. And so I like knocking him down a couple notches off the totem pole. And so what I do, this one particular time, this is the one time I got him really good. So I went out to cook out at night, because sometimes I'll go out to cook out in the middle of the night because my mom will make something that, it's not what I want. It's not necessarily my favorite. And so she'll be like, well, why don't you go buy your own food? And I'm like, okay. So I go out sometimes to cook out and get dinner or whatever if I don't like it. And I'll sit in front of my house on the street in my car because it's nighttime and it's nice and I can listen to the radio or listen to some songs. Or sometimes I'll sit in silence and just like listen and, be at peace and eat my big double burger tray and stuff and my milkshake. Just, be at peace the way God intended in my nice Toyota sanctuary. And so one particular night I was doing it, I parked in front of our house. I was facing the cul-de-sac that's at the end of the street. And I'm sitting there, I'm finishing up, and I see my brother walking down the street at 9 o'clock at night, it's dark, and I'm like, what is he doing outside? He's not supposed to be outside. And he's literally just strutting around in the dark, because he thinks he's just getting used to, oh wow, I'm outside, no one knows, I'm getting away with so much. And so he's literally, I get this idea. My car's off, the key's in the ignition, and so he starts walking towards my car to go into the house. And I have this idea that I'm gonna get him really good. So he walks past the car, and I slumped down all the way in the chair, my car was off, and I had my hand on the ignition, and literally, as soon as I saw the whites of his eyes, I turned the car on, music blasts, my lights comes on, and he screams and he runs in the house. Because he did not know anyone else was outside. And I got in the house and my mom wasn't even mad at me because she was like, that's what you get for being outside at 9 o'clock where you don't belong. But I think Revelation is a lot like that story. I think that sometimes God will reveal things to us because a divine revelation is usually, it's only truth or some sort of knowledge that's imparted by God. That's all that revelation is.
Yeah.
And sometimes I feel like God will reveal something about himself and we go into fight or flight mode. We go into fight or flight mode. And fight not in that we struggle with it, but fight in that we have to do something about it. We have to confront it in some sort of a way.
That's good.
And a lot of us run. I definitely run a lot from the revelations of God because God, when you get down to who he actually is, can sometimes be very intense. God is a very intense being. Person, I guess. Well, persons, 3. And so I feel like because it's just truth that is revealed by God, probably about God, or probably about you, about your future, about the situation, sometimes that can be very intense too. And so when we look at the story of the road at Emmaus, the road to Emmaus, we find these 2 guys. And we find these 2 guys who have had the worst vacation in Jerusalem they could possibly imagine. Now, there's this guy in the Bible named Jesus. You may have heard of him. He's kind of important. But there's this character in the Bible named Jesus, and he had a whole bunch of followers. Now, these men were some of his followers. We don't know if they were disciples or just followers. And so, Jesus was so popular. Jesus was a wildly popular rabbi, teacher, healer, and he was so incredibly popular that he said, hey guys, so it's Passover, we're going to go to Jerusalem. We're going to go to Jerusalem. It's the equivalent of saying, hey guys, it's Christmas, let's go to New York. It's the same thing. And so, because Jerusalem was the place to be during Passover. I mean, people who weren't even Jewish went to Passover in Jerusalem. That's how big of a deal it was. And so, all of his disciples, I can imagine them like little kids going like, yay, we're going to Jerusalem. So anyway, they're on their way to Jerusalem. And Jesus is so wildly popular that they clear the streets for him. They clear the streets for him. And then they have a parade to welcome him into the city. Now, when was the last time there was a parade to welcome you into Charlotte? I don't think so. Now, it would be great, but I don't think so. And Jesus is being welcomed for the wrong purpose. Jesus is being welcomed because people think he's going to do something that he didn't come to do. They are crowning him their physical king instead of the king of their hearts. And Jesus is concerned with healing their hearts and not their physical circumstances. He's concerned with healing the thing that can help to put change in motion on the outside, but they're not concerned with that. And so when Jesus ultimately disappoints them, everything just goes downhill on this vacation to Jerusalem for these followers.
Yeah.
Jesus is betrayed by his best friend, by one of his best friends. He's tried, he's convicted under a very crooked law book, under a very power-hungry government. He's stripped of his clothes, he's stripped naked, he's beaten, he's paraded through the streets, he's crucified, he's humiliated with everybody else who said that they were going to change things on crosses, and he was buried. And these men are just so mortified by what has gone on. And they saw the cross not as an open door, but as a closed casket. They saw the cross as the end to a story that never really got a chance to begin. And it's sort of like if you were best friends with the star football player in high school, and then during the championship game, he fumbles the ball, loses for everybody, and now everybody is associating you and that person, and they're mad at you.
Right.
And so these men are fleeing from the revelation that God is unfolding about himself because it got too intense.
Yeah.
It got too much for them.
Right.
And so we find these men running from their situation, their past. And so we pick up in Luke 24, 15 and 16. And this is a very interesting set of verses. It says, "And as they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them." So a little bit more context. These men left on the Sunday when Jesus rose from the dead. So they wake up in the morning. They're already really sad. They've been crying about what has been going on with Jesus and how he passed away and how he died. And these women come into the house and they say, "Hey, you know, Jesus' body, we went to the tomb to go anoint it. It wasn't there. He may be alive. Someone told us that he may be risen, but we don't know." And so now they're even more disappointed because not only did Jesus not come up to be who he said he was going to be to them, but there's no trace of him. And so they're running away. And isn't it interesting how in their running away, Jesus comes to them?
Wow.
Jesus doesn't come to them. I mean, Jesus doesn't talk about them behind their back and say, "Oh, well, they just ran away, so to heck with them." No, Jesus comes to them in their running away. He comes to them in their straying. And what we see is this interesting verse that I had such a hard time with, as I usually do. Luke 24, 16. "But they were kept from recognizing him." Now that's just weird. Because I would think if you went to someone's funeral, you would be thinking about them, and you might, have their image in your head. And so if they were just walking down the street, you'd be like, "Hold on a second, something's not right here."
Right.
And so I went to a couple of different commentaries, a couple of different sites, because I was really trying to figure this out. And so one of the sites, I think that sometimes as Christians it's okay if we say, "I don't know," because a lot of them gave some really crappy, sort of uneducated, "Oh, this is why." And it's like, no. So one of them said, Mark 16:12 was the reason why that explains all of my answers. So let's turn to Mark 16:12. Let's look, let's see what they're talking about here. So Mark 16:12 says that Afterward, Jesus appeared in a different form to two of them while they were walking in the country. Okay, I can work with that. Jesus appeared to them in a different form, so obviously they would not recognize him. Wrong. That's not true. Because everything after Mark 8 is not authoritative. And the reason why it's not authoritative is because Mark 9 through 19, actually Mark 9 through 20, that whole bottom section, usually there's a note in your Bibles that says this was added earlier after Mark even wrote the gospel. And the reason why is because the guy who was transcribing the Bible was like, wait a minute. And there was this whole sermon on Easter by Pastor Stephen about it. He was like, wait a minute. You know, they can't just leave the tomb and not tell anybody. So I feel like, here we go again with adding things God didn't ask us to add. I'm just going to add my input. Let's go through all the other Gospels and see what other things Jesus did and how he appeared and how I want Jesus to act and do things. Because that's the Gospel I want to tell. And I'm just going to add that on to the end instead of learning why Jesus and why the women just didn't tell.
Right.
And so because of that, a lot of religion scholars and theologians will say that Mark 16:9 through 19 is not authoritative. It's not authoritative. And so I had to go to another one. Now this one was just downright stupid. It was just downright dumb. It said, oh, well, the Greek word for recognizing him, they were kept from recognizing him was because they were holding their heads down the whole time. And they just never looked up to see that it was him. There was literally a commentary that said this. And I was like, okay, so let's look in the text. Let's look in Luke 24. This is a 7-mile journey. How are you going to hold your head down for 7 miles? Someone comes up to talk to you and you don't look at them. What? And then, not only that, they invite him into their house.
Yep.
So they got a good look at the guy. So obviously, if I'm like this, like, oh yeah, I'm so sad all of the time, that's for 7 miles?
No.
I don't think so. So then, the heavens opened up on my laptop, and there was a link to the answer. And the answer was, this is all about Revelation, I gotta make it somewhat dramatic. God revealed to me on my crappy HP computer that before it froze, it told me that this pastor, this Lutheran pastor said that, well, they were blinded by their experiences. They were blinded by their experiences. He said that humans will never will never expect something that they're not looking for.
Right. Wow.
And the spiritual, being that it is invisible, is often overlooked.
Yeah.
And so these men are coming from seeing Jesus hanging dead on the cross. And so in their mind, Jesus is dead, Jesus is gone, the cross has conquered Jesus, there's no more Jesus. And so Jesus comes to them and they're fleeing from the revelation about himself that isn't finished yet. Because he's like, y'all, I'm still in the works of doing stuff, and you just left in the middle of the movie, that's not cool. And they're blinded by their experiences. And I think a lot of times we are blinded by our experiences. And because of what we've been through in the past, we miss the revelation of God in our everyday lives.
Wow.
We miss what God is trying to show us about himself because we're too busy thinking about what happened way back when is going to happen again. And I didn't see God in that situation, so I'm not going to see him now.
Right.
And so these men fail to realize that God is always speaking. God is a God that never shuts up. He is always talking about himself, always revealing things about himself.
Yep.
Look at nature. Nature and everything that was created is a testament to who God is.
Right.
I'm one of those people who believes you can preach about anything. You can literally preach off of anything. Because there's always a lesson in something because God is in everything.
Yeah.
And God is always trying to reveal the person of who he is to us. And so I want to deal for a second with Jesus coming to the men. Jesus appeared to these men on the road. That's significant. And what I came up with was that Revelation can be doubted, but not dismissed.
Yeah.
Revelation can be doubted, but not dismissed.
That's good.
Jesus comes to these men who assume that Jesus is dead. They assume that Jesus is gone. And Luke 24, 25 to 26, Jesus tells them, literally, he says, "How foolish are you, and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken." Jesus comes up to these men, and he says, "Y'all, I sent out emails about this. I sent out voice messages about this. I told y'all about 1 billion times, I'm going to die, and I'm going to be buried, and I'm going to come back. And y'all just left because it got too hard and it got too inconvenient, and you missed out on the miracle.
Right.
You missed out on what I was trying to really do."
Yeah.
And a lot of us miss out on God because we leave in the middle. We give up in the middle. We give up in what God is trying to show us about himself.
Right.
And I think that it's funny because Jesus doesn't go, he goes to Mary Magdalene first, but literally the very next thing he does is he goes all the way out to a road that he shouldn't even be on, because they shouldn't even be running away, to just get these people and to recognize what happened, that he's alive again, which shows me that Jesus is constantly chasing after us. Jesus will never give up on you. He's constantly chasing after you. He's constantly trying to grab you. And there's a song we used to sing in my old church, "I'm chasing after you." And that's true, we are chasing after God, but he's also chasing back after us.
So good.
And God will never leave you hanging. He will always make sure that you got it.
Yeah.
And so the fact that Jesus came to these men meant that they had to do something with the truth that he was there, even if they didn't recognize him.
Right.
He's telling them that, the prophet said that Jesus would come back from the dead. Obviously, he did everything else in the scripture, so why would he not do this last thing?
Yeah.
And even if that's something that they can't fully accept yet, they have to place it in the pantheon of the ideas in their head. Because whenever God reveals something about you, you can't completely dismiss it because you know it's true.
Yeah.
When God reveals something to you, when truth is spoken to you, not even God's revelations, when truth is spoken to you, if I told you, if you didn't believe in gravity, and I told you gravity is a thing, sorry, but gravity is a thing, you would have to, and I proved that gravity was a thing, you would have to rationalize the truth of gravity being a thing in your ideas. Even if you can't fully accept it, you can't just be like, I'm not going to listen to him. Because in the back of your mind, you'd be like, that was a good point. That was a really good point that gravity is a thing. And so you always have to wrestle with truth. You can't completely dismiss truth. And it's a life that is constantly trying to subdue truth is a life that's lived in circles. You never get anywhere when you keep coming back to something that is true and continuously trying to reject it.
Yeah.
And you see that with a lot of people who aren't saved. A lot of people who don't fully grasp who God is. They keep running into the same problems that they had before.
Right.
And they keep coming up with, the answer is Jesus. No, the answer can't be Jesus. Let me keep going back around.
Yeah.
And they're never making progress forward. They're just spinning in circles on the racetrack, never getting anything done. Because they've never fully come to the realization that truth is something that they need to move forward. Truth is something that sets you free.
Yeah.
And the only way that truth can truly set you free is when it's recognized. And so my next point is, revelation is conceived through routine. Revelation is received through routine. Now this is Mitch's point, I have to say. We had a meeting about this sermon, and he said this point, and I didn't get it. I honestly didn't get it. I mean, I got it in the text, but I didn't get it. So I was up late at night, trying to come up with what the heck this could mean, because routines are something that you change. I like changing routines. I don't like doing the same old thing all the time because it gets stale. I mean, I listen to the same old music all the time, but I mean, I've been listening to Earth, Wind, and Fire lately.
Just not Taylor Swift version.
No. Oh, don't get me. Okay. It's another sermon for another time. Okay? It's another sermon for another time. The devil will come and he will steal the good, great thing from heaven, and he will pervert it into his own style. So I had to really wrestle with this, and I came up with this: routines are good, and routines are bad. There are good routines, like brushing your teeth and taking a shower, and then there are bad routines like smoking and, I don't know, not exercising. I do that. And so we're going to look at a good routine, because there are bad routines, but let's look at a good routine. So let me turn to one of the Bible stories that has affected my life the most. It's actually a book that's named after my brother, Joshua. The book of Joshua. And I'm going to turn to Joshua 6, and I'm going to quickly read 2 through 5. Because it's a very good passage. It's a very good verse, set of verses. So Joshua 6, I turn to Joshua 2. Joshua 6, 2 through 5. It says, "Then the Lord said to Joshua, 'See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men. March around the city once with all of the armed men, and do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets and ram's horns on the front of the ark, and on the 7th day, march around the city 7 times with the priests blowing the trumpets. And when they hear them, the sound of a long blast on the trumpets, make a sound of a long blast on the trumpets, and have the whole army give a loud shout, and then the wall of the city will collapse, and the army will go in, and everyone straight in.'" I don't know why I said that twice. But, so, God imparts a routine to Joshua. He imparts a blueprint for how to attack his enemies. He reveals to him, see what I did there? A blueprint on how to attack his enemies. And what's interesting is that some of us have to get into a routine of worship. God is basically saying, I need you to worship me even though it looks bad, and I need you to worship me around your problems. And some of us need to get into this routine of worship, because we hold ourselves back from worship, and it stunts the vehicle of revelation.
That's good.
Because worship is the vehicle through which revelation can enter into our minds. When we, not conjure up, but when we enter into the Spirit and the presence of God, then and only then can revelation happen, because his Spirit is being tapped into. And Joshua literally marches around his problem, praising God for 6 days, a routine that God has imparted to him of worship, and the walls come crumbling down. And there are a lot of us here today who need to march around our problems with worship, because that's the only way through which the walls will crumble. And so we go back to Emmaus Road, and these men are in the house, and we go to Luke 24:30, and it says, "When he was at the table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them, and their eyes were opened, and they recognized him." They recognized him. It was only through the routine of Jesus doing what he did at the Last Supper, doing what he did every time he sat with them, breaking bread, revealing who he truly was to them, that their eyes were opened. It's only through worship, routinely going through the routine of worship, that our eyes can be opened to who Jesus is. It does not matter what Jesus looked like. These men didn't even know Jesus from what he looked like. Hopefully Jesus was a handsome guy, but obviously his looks were a little understated, because they recognized him by his action, and not by his looks, not by his appearance. And a lot of us want to look the part, and a lot of us want to look so holy and so righteous, but God is saying, I need you to put into action who I am. I need you to put into action what I've told you to do. Because people are not going to remember your face. They're going to remember what you do.
So
They're going to remember what you put into motion. Because you can be the revelation for someone else.
Amen.
You can be the revelation for someone else.
So good.
And so we continue, and we continue to the last section that I have, which is Revelation is recognized in reverse. This is another Mitch point. However, I might argue I would have gotten to this by myself. And so we're going to go to Luke 24:32, the last section, the last verse. And it says, they asked each other, were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us? And so they didn't recognize Jesus from his looks. They didn't recognize Jesus until he put into action who he was. But something tells me that they had an inkling. And the reason why something tells me they had an inkling was because it felt like Jesus. Even though they didn't know it was Jesus, it felt like Jesus.
Yeah.
And sometimes you're growing in your walk with God. You may notice some things. You're growing in your walk with God, and you don't even know it. God grows us sometimes, and we don't even know we're growing. And I think that the powerful thing about Revelation and God never shutting up and him being everywhere is that because he's everywhere, we're constantly learning things about him and we don't even know. I love nature. I love nature so much. I love taking walks in the park and stuff like that. But the thing that about nature that I really like is that God created nature where everything reflects who he is. And so when I go for a walk, even though I may not understand everything that I see, I'm still being revealed who God is. And so I'm going to close. And I want to take us back for a second. Jesus, during his earthly ministry, visited with a Samaritan woman. Jesus was Jewish. That was not something you were supposed to do. This Samaritan woman was going through her daily routine, her daily everyday life, feeling shame and regret, and Jesus entered into her everyday in the most ordinary ways. And so these men, Jesus entered into their life in the most ordinary ways, just a passerby on a road. This woman saw Jesus, just a stranger at a well. But it was through that everyday, ordinary occurrence that Jesus was dressed up in that he was truly able to work and truly able to reveal who he was. And so I'm going to pray, and I want us all to stand for worship. And I want us to start focusing every day on how can we look at the ordinary and see God.
That's good.
How can we start seeing God in the everyday, ordinary occurrences? And so God, I just thank you so much for who you are.